Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Asian Leadership Conference webinar series hosted by the Chosunilbo. I'm Hannah John, Assistant Professor of International Business at EHA's Graduate School of International Studies and Director of EHA Center for Global Social Responsibility. I would first like to introduce our distinguished panelists today. We are pleased to have with us Mr. Ron Pulyakin, CEO of Nanox, and Ms. Gigi Wang, Chair of Berkeley Method of Entrepreneurship Bootcamp and Industry Fellow at UC Berkeley. Thank you to you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
We'll be talking about a very timely and important topic under the theme of guiding startups during the COVID-19 era. As our panelists know, there's been a huge human toll due to the effects of COVID-19, as well as very real economic impacts across the world. In many cases, we see that SMEs have been hardest hit, and this disruption has also affected startups. What I would like to do today is facilitate a discussion about how COVID-19 has impacted the startup ecosystem, and with our speakers also trying to provide some practical guideposts for startups trying to navigate these turbulent times. With Ron, an acclaimed serial entrepreneur, and Gigi, a distinguished figure in entrepreneurship training, and someone who has also been a part of the founding team of several startups, we're in store for a very dynamic and helpful dialogue. Today's webinar should last roughly 1 hour, which should give us plenty of time to discuss the issues set out in our agenda today. But before we get started, I would like to provide a more detailed background for each of our guests. Mr. Ron Pulyakin is an entrepreneur who combines business-focused innovation with social impact initiatives, leveraging advanced technology to create companies and solutions that address real human pain points and healthcare needs. He is founder and CEO of Nanox, which develops imaging systems combining lightweight and affordable imaging machines based on X-ray source technology with cloud-based infrastructure. Nanox aims to deploy its systems globally to bring screening-based preventive healthcare to communities that previously did not have access to medical imaging. The Nanox Global 111 initiative is one screening for each symptomatic patient every year. Other enterprises founded by Mr. Polyakin include PowerMat, a wireless power solution, and WellSense, a solution for eliminating pressure ulcers. Mr. Polyakin also co-founded Musashi AI, an industrial AI robot employment agency, Illumigen, a colposcope for improved women's health, and Years of Water, a water purification system. Born in Haifa, Mr. Polyakin studied arts and design at the Bezalel Academy of Arts in Jerusalem and currently lives in Motza Elite with his wife and 5 children. Thank you for joining us today, Ron. Perhaps you can say a few words to our audience today, mainly young entrepreneurs.
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Hannah. It's a great pleasure to be here today. Um, we are going through a big, I think, new normal. And I think part of what I hope to provide today in this session is really the way we are dealing with it, giving a short and long-term kind of view of what could be done. Every problem can become an opportunity, obviously. So hopefully I can provide some hope, not only despair, to the audience of today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next guest is Gigi Wang. Ms. Wang runs MG Team LLC, which delivers entrepreneurship and innovation training programs globally. She's also an industry fellow and faculty at UC Berkeley's Tarza Center for Entrepreneurship and Technology, where she chairs the Berkeley Method Entrepreneurship Bootcamp and teaches Berkeley Executive Innovation Workshops. She mentors and advises over 200 startups a year around the world. Earlier in her career, Ms. Wang was on founding teams of 5 tech startups in Silicon Valley, Europe, and Asia. One of her startups, Pacific Internet in Singapore, went public in the US on the Nasdaq in 1999. Gigi holds BS and MS degrees in mechanical engineering from Stanford University and an MBA from the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. She's a frequent speaker at conferences around the world, including the Chief Innovation Officer Summit and Asian Leadership Conference. Gigi was born in Taiwan, grew up in the US, and has worked a lot in Asia and is very interested in helping entrepreneurs bridge different cultures, which I think would be very useful for us today. Gigi, would you please say a few words to our audience?
Hi, Hannah. Thank you very much for having me. And yeah, it's a kind of a very interesting time right now. is with COVID, the world is completely changed. A lot of the things that we were used to and we counted on are different. Like, just look in universities, like here in California, students can't come to campus anymore and everything's online. And so there's a lot of adjusting to this changes. And one of the things that I look back is in my career as a tech entrepreneur, we encountered 9/11 and also the 2001 crash, and things seemed really bleak then. But what arose out of that was actually more sophistication in startups being better when they presented to investors, being more rigorous. And then we recovered, things got even better in the whole tech entrepreneurship world. And then 2007, there was another crash. And this time it's like, okay, got to get back, be better, be tougher. And we arose. The economy got so high. It's been the best it's ever been in the last couple of years. And so here's another crash. It's another chance for us all to get better and, do better things, figure out new innovations for the world.
Thank you so much for that really uplifting message, because I think we really need that at this time. And I completely agree with your comments on universities. We're still struggling to try to see how best we can deliver quality curriculum to our students. And so hopefully we can share some of that as well today. So I think that's a great segue to where we're going to start. And I would like to ask both Gigi as well as Ron to help flesh out the new reality for startups in the COVID-19 era, especially some of the major challenges they face. You already have talked about some of them, but perhaps we can bring those more to light during this initial kind of dialogue. What really, I think the most tangible impact of COVID-19 was we've had changing social realities. This has meant social distancing, some cases lockdown. And so what that has meant is more traditional patterns of consumption, like going to a store offline and buying products and services. A lot of that has really gone out the window, and there's been that disruption there. So we're trying to do our best to adjust to these new realities, and perhaps maybe Ron and Gigi, you can highlight some of the most salient challenges that we face today. Ron, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, thank you. So I want to relate to this question in two ways. One is the short term, and the other one is actually the long term reality. I think in short term, there are also two aspects here. An external aspect is that every startup obviously can experience the hesitation. I mean, startups that are depending on investors uh, may uh, may experience hesitation from investors to invest. Customers are slowing down their demand. The inability to physically go and install or train the customers may result in some kind of slowdown. So overall, the intensity, I would say, of the external aspects of startups are going down, and that's something that is quite could become quite harsh, especially given the fact that in a startup you're always trying to really push forward. Sometimes you want to push forward, but nobody is on the other side accepting this, this motivation. But I think that short term, the biggest challenge, in fact, is actually the way you manage your team internally. Because for startup is really all about, and I think Gigi will agree with me. It's not only about technology, but it's also about the spirit. It's about making the impossible. And I think in some ways, how a leader, let's say the CEO of a startup, can actually keep the team together. How do you keep hope and provide some practical ways of staying relevant? Is in some, to my opinion, it's even much more important than the external problems, because people can do anything. People can deal with many difficulties in their life. The question is how strong you are from the inside. And what, as a leader of a startup, what is a message you're sending to your team when you're trying to keep your head above the water.
Mm.
So I found it very useful, especially now that the teams are divided. And in my case, some of my companies are in different locations. I found very useful actually to encourage more internal discussions, more some self-reflection, product development, strategies, or many things that we can actually control ourselves, and even beautifying the offices, which may sound to you kind of childish. It's not really childish because, for many of us, the startup is really our second home. And now, outside there is a work, so we need to keep our head down, but remember that we're together. I think the strength of organization in times of crisis is starting from the inside. So again, short term, the obvious thing is all the external issues, but really the trick is for leaders how to keep the internal strengths together. Now, in terms of long term, I believe that this is where it is my opinion that COVID-19 is actually, the medical pandemic, but really what's going to be the result of that in the, let's say, middle of next year will be, could be a terrible economic crisis. Because I believe that at the end of the day, there are no vacuum, and industries that are not working now, providing with a lot of, I would say, a lot of issues that we need to address later on. Sometimes there is a delay. Obviously, we look at the markets, and the markets are totally not in sync with the reality of the economical environment. So I do believe that as a startup owner or leader, you need to look at mid of next year, expect for the worst, and try to plan something that creates relevancy for your startup. I think it's all about relevancy. Money is going to be spent. People will need services remotely or otherwise. And the trick is, again, in my opinion, to have enough time for the startup to expect that there will be very, very negative scenario in economic globally, and how to build a scenario under which you as a startup can become relevant to the
Mm.
new situation. So long term is actually where I believe there is the big challenge, but also the biggest opportunity. Thank you.
Right. I completely agree with the idea of keeping your focus on the mission and also organizational resilience. And I think communication is something that is a challenge, but as you mentioned, it's a great opportunity to actually increase the communication with the tools that are available rather than letting social distancing become an obstacle to that. So I think we'll talk about maybe some strategies to do that going forward. Maybe I'll turn to Gigi as well. I'm sure that there are some things that Ron said that you resonated with. Are you seeing anything
Oh,
else in
oh,
addition?
yeah, I actually want to talk to Ron's kind of question and challenge about how do you keep the team together? How do you keep them connected, especially geographically dispersed when you can't be together? And I, with I'm going to talk about with so much of our workforce being younger, they've all been so digitally. They're all very digital. They're so used to being online. Like when my sons were young, they would be playing a game and they would be making friends from California playing with someone in New York. So the kids are really comfortable with that. And so within our own department at Berkeley, once we went into social distancing, it was really hard for the students not to get together and have fun and hang out. And so one thing we did is we created weekly fun Zoom events. And one thing we did was a book club. One of our staff who was really into fitness, she led a Zumba class. And then my favorite was when we all actually had an online Trivial Pursuits, and one of the students put everyone in different rooms, and I got to meet a bunch of new students I hadn't met before. But we look forward to our weekly social get-togethers, and I got to meet actually more people in these social events than I met in person since I was traveling a lot. So now, in answer to your question, Hannah, I think there's two big areas of challenges that startups have in this COVID situation. And the first is customers. You know, especially if you're used to dealing with your customers physically, you can't deal with them, right? And so you have to, the challenge is to figure out new ways to connect with your customers to keep the communications going, you know. And um, I see, I saw a very interesting example is with the shelter in place, all the stores and shops had to stop giving services in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area. And there was one shop where the woman was she was a beautician. So she did nails and hair. Okay. And then her husband was a painter. So we have a community app called Nextdoor where people in the community can share and communicate. And I thought this was really interesting is the husband who was the painter, he posted on Nextdoor, yeah, my wife can't cut hair because her shop is closed, but in order to be productive, she has made hundreds of masks. And we would like to give these masks to the community. So if anyone wants a mask, stop by on Sunday between 10 and 2 and come and pick up a mask. And so it it raised their awareness about his painting business, her hair business. People came and picked up the mask, and they all said, "Oh, when this is over, I'm coming here to get my hair cut." And hey, by the way, I need my garage painted. Can you paint garages when this is over? So by giving value and trying to be positive, they ended up bringing a lot of positive attention and doing all this free marketing. And so I think one of the ways is to keep trying to figure out ways you can give value, and they can be really creative. And through that, you can continue to grow your business and build connections to customers. And so just keep being creative, find ways, and don't give up. The second area that my startups are really worried about now is about fundraising. You know, investors, because their funds may be decreasing because if some of their LPs are companies or LPs are pension funds, and with all the budget cuts and decreased revenue, the investors may not be getting money. So they may not be investing as much. And so it makes it even tougher for startups to raise money in this environment. And rather than worrying about, oh no, there's not as much money to go around, it's harder to get, take it as a challenge to become even better. Because if you make your company and your startup, you make your venture stronger in terms of, you know, how you get your product, in terms of your customers, in terms of your strategy, you're raising the bar on the company. It's getting better, and it'll raise your chances to get money, but it'll also increase your likelihood for success because you're building a stronger company. So take this as a challenge to be better rather than something to discourage you.
I think just tagging on to your point about fundraising and difficulty accessing capital, and I guess the immediate impact of COVID-19 being that we're stopped for funds. And so what many governments have done is the kind of knee-jerk reaction, well, we better provide some funds for struggling startups. Even in Korea, we have the Seoul Metropolitan Government, which announced plans to invest about 175 billion Korean won. It's roughly 150 million US dollars. And it's for two major strategic industries, biomedicine and the untapped industry, so fintech, drones, and robots. And so, again, I think this was a result of that need for cash. And so it includes 50 billion won for wage support for engineers, 10 billion targeting 100 promising startups. So for those that will be so-called soon-to-be unicorns, as well as 115 billion to prevent companies with really good technology from going bankrupt because of these investment shortages. And just tagging on to what you were saying, that even during crisis, you become forced perhaps to become more resilient and nimble and to work that much harder. What is your impression of policy responses in general, maybe even specifically here? And I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Great. I'll take a stab at this. Is that is really awesome that the Korean government is recognizing some of the challenges and actually investing resources to help. And that that is really exciting to hear. If I have any suggestions, is instead of in addition to giving the money, make sure to give the money in a smart way. Okay, and so make sure that there's follow up, that giving the money, there's really good guidelines on how it's given, what are the requirements to give it, and what and make sure that whoever they give, whichever companies they give, they justify it, and then there's reporting and monitoring. I have a kind of a funny analogy is when my older son went to college, I was like, oh, my son's going to college. I'm going to fund him. I'm going to fund him. No problem. He wants money because it's for college. But I didn't ask him what he was spending his money on. I just kept writing checks. And I ended up probably figuring out he spent a lot of it on beer versus books. And in the end, he went to school for 6 years, right? But so when my younger son went to college, all right, this time I'm going to do a lot of checks and balances. Okay. You want $5,000. Okay. I need accounting. What are you going to use it for? What is your budget? Give me your receipts. And I was much, much tougher on him, but he actually did a lot better because there was some oversight and he graduated in 4 years. And so I think you need to do the same as, you know, allocate the money in a smart way. Um, the U.S. gave a ton of money out in their COVID response, and they found some issues. They found some stumbles that they didn't account for, which I think they're going to address in the next tranche of money. They needed to put in more stricter guidelines so that the money didn't go where it was unintended. And so I think that's something that would be really wise to do, but it's very exciting that they're giving startups in Korea are getting this. And so you can continue to work on those innovations while the world is a little bit, you know, in a different state.
Okay, we actually have a lot more to cover, so I'm going to move us right along. I will definitely want to hear from Ron regarding his opinions on this as well. But we mentioned before that this environment has kind of led to a lot of panic, especially from the position of startups and perhaps early stage startups. And so both of you have perhaps a much more advantageous vantage point. You've experienced some of the crashes in the past, crises in the past, and you've seen how really strong initiative and really smart strategy and greater communication can help you overcome these strategies. But I think for a lot of startups, especially early stage startups, they might feel very paralyzed right now. This might be the first major crisis. Again, as you mentioned, very difficult to access customers in traditional ways. There might be shortages of funding and perhaps other obstacles as well. You might even look at issues like how do you actually meet with investors if you can't speak to them face to face and you've never met them before, and how to market your products and services, how to go overseas. And if you're going to export your products where markets are growing, how do you even go about doing that when everything still seems to be kind of on edge? And so I wonder if maybe we can turn to Ron a little bit. I know that you've uh, Nanix is a huge, huge company. I dare call it a startup. But perhaps if you're sitting in their shoes, what are some kind of advice, practical advice that you might give to them in terms of what can you do at this stage?
Okay, sure, but I would like also to talk about policymaking because this is a very loaded kind of topic in from my point of view. I mean, I think for entrepreneurs, the key point again is to be flexible. I mean, the new normal is something that you need to adjust to. Money is not everything. I mean, most startups actually base themselves for funds that are coming on time, but in reality, not. You can adjust, and I think good ideas with good people can actually survive much deeper waves than we see now. Now, you need to remember as an entrepreneur that investors, I mean, let me tell you what, as an entrepreneur, what I wouldn't like to do. Okay? So I mean, I would like to meet investors that are smart enough to look at the opportunities regardless of where the market is. And if I see anyone that is trying to take advantage of the entrepreneurs and the startups because markets are down, be flexible, valuation, preferences, I will just walk away. I think long-term entrepreneurs need to partner with investors. Investors are their partners. They're not they're not someone that in exchange of providing money can rule because startup is based on the team. And I think that I do believe, and I know for a fact that there are a lot of smart investors that look at the opportunities and actually they're willing to double down on people. Double down is an American term, but they're really to increase their investment and to bet that when things are there, they want to have a better position with the entrepreneurs. I would advise investors, but also entrepreneurs, not to give in into what could become like taking advantage of the situation. Personally, I hate it. I mean, I want to be realistic, but startups, especially in early stage, um, should be in a position again to partner with investors. And from my many years of experience, nothing good is happening long term when investors taking advantage of stress in a company. At the end of the day, it will not work. And there is interesting statistics that I read someplace that at the end of the day, startups without the core entrepreneurs long term cannot succeed. Statistically, I mean, there are other cases, but so so I would kind of advise the entrepreneurs to take a deep breath and not to fall into some, easy opportunities unless if they are absolutely sure that those investors are going to be there for them long term and they understand that expectation setting are done and not that someone basically came to buy them, and dictate from now on what's going on because it's not going to work. I would say though that for investors, um, relevancy is the name of the game. That's also for policymakers, and I think what the Korean government did with biotech and healthcare basically realizing that there are a lot of good technologies that will be part of our future. I mean, namely, the idea that physicians do not need to meet in person the patient anymore, and digital health, remote diagnostic, big data are all things that are going to play a big role in our future life. And therefore, if you could support and make sure that those companies are staying alive, both as an investor and also policymaker from the government, it is very, very important. In some countries, we see that the government actually give guarantee to the investment houses and basically encouraging them to put money at risk where the government is taking the guarantee that if everything goes down, it will be backed by the government, and that's, I believe, a very, very good direction. But overall, I must tell you that I have a lot of loaded kind of emotion for the policymakers. In my opinion, I cannot speak for Korea because obviously what you've mentioned is something that's very positive. But it is my idea that policymakers, government, especially in Israel, US, and other countries that we are in Japan, they need a wake-up call. I do believe that they are lagging behind the situation in a big way. And I mean, let's face it, COVID-19 is here to stay. It's not going away tomorrow. It's not something that is going, like magically disappear from our life. Or at least let's assume and prepare for that. And in that context, I think there is no black and white solution. And flexibility and creativity is what definitely needed because the next problem we're going to hit is not COVID-19. This is going to be a huge pandemic of economics. Again, so I do believe that policymakers need to wake up and actually be more agile. And I'll give some examples in a minute, but uh, they need to remember that they have an army of entrepreneurs that are willing to go to whatever extent and actually make reality happen. And they need to utilize it instead of blocking, without any flexibility, trading and the ability to travel. I mean, I'm sure there should be a business travel under which people that are totally clean can go from country to country and actually carry on and putting the seeds to what will be the cure in 9 months from today. And I don't see that much, unfortunately. And a personal experience that I have a factory in Japan that is actually making the critical component for a device that will help uh, defeat actually COVID-19, and I cannot go there. Now I do have good people there, and I do have Zoom, but it's not practical for it. I mean, I'm sure Gigi will agree with me that if you are in technology, in many cases you need to have hands-on, especially when you talk about material science and processes, and the inability of traveling, it's just not smart. And I'm sure that in terms of policymakers, that's something that could be truly better, and hopefully it will happen soon. Now, in terms of how the company is dealing with this new reality, first of all, it's not easy. That's I mean, I can give you one example that one of our companies has to do with femtech. We have an amazing technology that enables remote diagnostic and testing of females when they go to their gynecologist. Now, in reality, and this is an FDA-approved company with an amazing technology that can actually make a difference in healthcare in the U.S. and globally. And despite all of that, we have here a pile of systems that cannot travel to the US to designated places in MD Anderson and Baylor University Hospital, and some other gynecologists that are, very, very much waiting for this technology because it will simply solve one of the issues of social distancing and the ability of a woman in South Dakota to get diagnostic from New York City without any need for her to go and see the oncologist, let's say. So it's very, very difficult. And what we're trying to do is really to do some remote training and to push things and stay relevant. However, unfortunately, you cannot sometimes overcome physical device that needs to go to a physical clinics with physical person doing training. So in that context, my only comment is that I would expect that policymakers will be more agile and flexible because this is what will kill the joy next year if we're not doing it right now. So
Right.
thank you. I'm sorry for the emotional aspect, but we're going through a lot of real life issues with these policymakers.
Right. I think agility, flexibility, definitely, in addition to any funds and also oversight is, as Gigi was mentioning, I think would be very important as well. When it comes to day to day for starters, but I think also we also mentioned a little bit, Gigi, about universities as well, because we're also trying to scramble to best train our students and to engage with them. A lot of Korean universities as well are trying to train students or young entrepreneurs, as you would call it, but given social distancing and most classes were online last semester and a lot of things are still undecided for the fall semester, perhaps you can share a little bit about not just the startups perhaps that you're advising, but also from a university perspective. How can we, on a day-to-day basis, perhaps position ourselves best to help young entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I well, we are putting the program. We, in Berkeley, all the University of California schools have basically said we are going to deliver all our courses online this fall. Okay, and I teach startup bootcamp course, which is a 5-day course where the students come in, they form teams, they develop a startup, they work on the product, the business model, the go to market, and then on the 5th day they present to Silicon Valley investors who come in and give feedback. So it's a very, very experiential class, and we are going to do this online. And so every class has student course coordinators, and they are working with me very tightly and engaged to how do we put this program online. We're going to have speakers. We have a lot of activities that we typically do in person. We're actually finding online equivalents to teach certain topics like team building, like you know prototyping. And what's really interesting is there's quite a lot of tools online. People are already thinking and developing and sharing best practices. So we're going ahead with it and we're going to do it online. And as I mentioned before, this generation is the perfect generation to carry out this experiment because all of them are digital natives. They grew up with technology, they grew up online, and for them, actually, it's not that hard. And they're coming up with a lot of creative ways to make the whole education experience interesting. And one of the things is because people can't go out and do social activities and physical activities, people are staying at home, staying in their rooms. And so the availability of people to interact is surprisingly higher. And so, um, not just for the students, but also for industry mentors, because the industry mentors aren't traveling to Israel or to Korea. They're at home, they're not on a plane. And so they're actually available to mentor the students, especially on their startup projects. And so we're trying to take advantage of some of the opportunities that are there, which is availability and online tools, and using that to continue to make the education experience engaging and fun and to increase the students' networks with people.
I think what you mentioned as well, I actually do have some university colleagues overseas who are using this newfound time to pursue their own business ideas, whether it's coaching or, as you said, mentoring other students. And so, actually, it might be a blessing in disguise how we can best utilize this newfound time and to use it productively. But again, I think some of us are still just getting over the initial shock and still trying to adjust while being diligent in our primary responsibility to our students. And so I think a lot of the tips that you have shared would be very helpful for us over here in Korea. I think Ron also mentioned this a little bit, but I'm going to just tear it apart a little bit more. But during this time, but even in general for startups, it's a very competitive environment. We hear about amazing startups that succeed in very tangible, visible ways. But I think a recurring theme in entrepreneurship is also the role of failure. And for many cultures, including in Korea, and Gigi, we talked about earlier, as you mentioned, growing up in Taiwan, there seems to be an aversion to risk and failure, which may prove to actually be an obstacle when it comes to successfully building a startup, becoming more resilient, being hungry, and going overseas, for example. So perhaps, Ron, if you could maybe concretize or flesh out a little bit more. I heard you in previous interviews talk about some ventures that you had led in the past that ultimately failed. And on a personal level, how do you view that failure? And how do you think young entrepreneurs can learn from your experience, especially during this time?
Well, unfortunately, I can share a lot of failures. So, but let me be very direct. As an entrepreneur, you cannot succeed without failure. Simple. So the idea that you expect to succeed and you take very in a very serious way your failure to the level that this will kind of create a barrier between you and the next idea is totally wrong. Now, in Israeli society, we have we call it um, I would say we were grown up on the idea that you need to survive. Whatever you have to do, you need to survive. And to do things in order to survive, by definition, takes you some failures. So I think that the environment that we're creating for our engineers are environments where it's okay to fail so long that you really create a catharsis and look deep into what are the reasons later on. And sometimes the reasons are, market conditions. Sometimes, you have an amazing technology that didn't meet the right market, or in many cases, in my cases, many of my ideas failed, simply came too early to life. I should sit on it for 5 years, 6 years, and that would be perfect. So I think the key, I think, to manage the gap between failure to success is really to realize that failing is part of life, and not to encourage failure, but but to embrace failure, try to learn from it. And the key point in what I'm doing in life is actually to identify failure as soon as possible. Now, I'll
Mm.
give you some examples. When I was much younger, I was, I mean, for me, again, failure was not an option, right? When you're going in as an entrepreneur, you say, okay, I'll give everything I have, I will risk everything, especially before I had kids and wife, and, I will do whatever it takes to succeed. And sometimes this is, you fall in love with your own idea too much. So I learned that, I mean, in many cases, I extended the life of startups way beyond what normally should have been done, because simply the product was not ready or the technology was not meeting any real needs. So I think on balance, failure is not a bad thing. As we grow up, and by the way, naivety. I mean, going in with naivety is very important. I mean, I mean, when we get more experience, actually, it's not necessarily good, because in many cases startups are doing the impossible. But if you're a very experienced person and you already recognize all the difficulties and you analyze the risk and the reward, sometimes you will not do anything. So I think naivety is also important. What I've learned is actually two aspects. Number one is that it's okay to fail, but stop it when it's small enough. If it's not working, move on to the next idea. And number two, try to balance between being very determined to succeed, and you as the leader need to every day come up and kind of looking like very, very encouraged and very sure that we're going to the right direction, even though it's over you don't have any visibility. So try to balance this very positive, I would say, strengths with some caution not to fall in love with your own ideas. Because sometimes that will take you much longer to come back to another startup idea. Now, overall, I mean, I've been very fortunate to actually to affect a change in the people's life in many of my companies. But I would say that for any good idea that saw the light of day, and actually got from technology to consumers, I would say at least five ideas went down without any success. I mean, some of them were just ideas. Some actually we spent some money behind. So it's okay. I mean, overall, I feel that I had my share of successes, and when you succeed, it's a big success. And it's okay to fail on the way. It's not a big problem. So that's my approach. So in that case, I would say that for us, Israel, it's very natural to fail sometimes on the way up. And but I do have many friends in Korea and Japan that I realize that the culture is slightly different, and also in Taiwan. I mean, you cannot change cultures, so you cannot actually. But I would suggest a little bit more. I mean, be softer with yourself. It's okay.
I think that's great to hear. Very, very inspiring, and actually the perfect segue, I think, to introducing Gigi into the conversation. And I've heard Gigi in previous interviews when you had mentioned that at your boot camp for Berkeley, you quote, "Learn to fail and get over it," end quote. And I think that really resonates with what Ron just mentioned. That actually, the quicker you know when to throw away an idea, the better, or perhaps the less heartache and the easier you can get over it. And so I'm really interested in kind of the mechanics behind that, and maybe perhaps an example that you could bring in, and also and we mentioned before in a previous conversation that in the university setting, where a lot of this training is starting, especially in Korea, students are very reluctant to fail. And many university programs might not be properly equipped to help students develop as entrepreneurs. So maybe you could talk to this point a little bit, what you've done at UC Berkeley. You've already mentioned a little bit, but maybe also in how you're dealing with other universities around the world. And I think changing culture will take time, as Ron has
Right.
mentioned, and we don't know if it's an impossible thing. Perhaps you can share some of your insight and experience with that.
Exactly. Absolutely. So, as you can imagine, UC Berkeley is a very, very selective school. So many of the students who come have basically had a perfect academic career. You know, they got the best grades. They, took the best AP test. And they seem to do everything perfect. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to experiment, and not everything's going to work. It's not you find an entrepreneur where everything they developed was perfect on the first try. Steve Jobs wasn't that way, Elon Musk wasn't that way, you know a whole bunch of entrepreneurs. And so if you want to be innovative and entrepreneurial, you have to try new things. You have to be willing to be brave and try, and a lot of them aren't going to work. And maybe don't look at it as failures. Look at it as experimenting and learning from it. I mean, as children, if we're riding a bike, no child gets on a bike and goes zoom a mile down the street. No, you fall. And then you figure out, okay, I need to balance like this. You know, as a child, you know, doing something and not succeeding the first time was part of learning. And sometimes in the strive for perfection, we lose that ability to accept experimentation and learning. And learning actually stops being about learning skills, but becomes simply about memorization. And that doesn't, the skills to memorize knowledge doesn't help in the world of entrepreneurship innovation, because you're going where no one's gone before. And so there is no preset answer. And so the sooner students get more entrepreneurship students get comfortable with trying new things and them not working, the better. And what's the most important thing I think about failure isn't that you have to learn how to fail, but you have to learn how to learn from the failures. And so in the class, we actually will set up exercises, which 90% of the time they're going to fail. There's an exercise we do called the Marshmallow Challenge, and there's a TEDx talk on it where 90% of the teams will fail. And then when they fail, it forces them to reflect on, why did it not work? How could we have done it better? If they built it right and it didn't fail, they're like, oh yeah, we're a bunch of winners. And they don't step back and reflect and learn from it and learn. And so I think you learn much more if you take chances and end up in, when you take chances, you will fail. And if you do that, you're more likely to learn a lot more. And as Thomas Edison put it, I have not failed. I have only found 10,000 things that did not work, and they led me to my super inventions.
I was going to actually use the Thomas Edison quote, but you stole it from me. But that's all right. Happy to give you the credit for Thomas Edison. But absolutely, I think that's the only way really to approach that, to make the environment safe for students to learn. And maybe it doesn't go according to plan, but that's okay, because we figure out another way to navigate that. And I think that's even more relevant today within this environment. And hopefully, maybe the online setting might provide an even safer environment for them to do that. We have just a little bit of time left. Maybe I can sneak in another question, a really short one here. I think there might be some viewers who might not even have startups yet. They might be in the pre-startup stage, thinking of ideas. They might be students, perhaps ones that I told to listen for today. So I'm wondering, just for two really seasoned entrepreneurs and for you've seen kind of the changes that have taken place recently. Maybe you could share a little bit about some growth opportunities or potential areas that you see for potential startups. And with regards to that, what are some of the skills and competencies that you feel are really essential to develop as entrepreneurs? Maybe we can start with Ron. I haven't heard you in a while.
Anna, good. And Gigi, I'm absolutely going to attend your seminar about failure. It seems like I should. I don't know that I cannot commit that I will take the marshmallow test, because I think maybe in failure to success, I think the proportion I hope will be more than 90, less, more balanced. But I will definitely attend, because it seems like And
You're
you
more
know
than
that.
welcome. Maybe you can come and be a guest speaker.
No, no, I want to be a common student. Actually, I think we still have something to learn every day, and it's part of the spirit, right? We learn every day, and we should feel humble enough that we can observe and learn something new. I mean, when we are getting too sure at ourselves as an entrepreneur, forget it. We can go and work in a bank or something, but not a startup. But I do want to say that I mean, two comments very shortly. Number one, I think that for students or someone that wants to establish a startup, I would truly look for those things that are missing in the world given the COVID-19 and in general. I mean, let's think about what I mean. It's all about relevancy. If you're not going to create something that someone needs, and someone needs in a bigger form, like relevancy for the next 50 years, I think you have a smaller chance of success basically. So number one, I will really encourage people to think about things that the world will need in the next 50 years, but also things that are close to their hearts. Because again, startup is also it's a mental condition. It's not only a business plan. I mean, if you cannot identify totally with what you do, and you don't really truly love it, it will be very hard for you to be strong when things are going to be tough. So number one is the relevancy. Number two, make sure that it's something that close to your heart. And then as to money from investors, I would encourage entrepreneurs. Actually, there is a book I love very much called The Lean Startup. I don't know. I'm sure Gigi knows. It's really about how building a startup with very minimal dependency on external support, money, etc. And I think there is a pattern that sometimes when entrepreneurs are starting to collect money, they view this as a sign of success, but in reality, it's liability because now you have another one that has a big expectation to make big money because of your idea, and you need to be careful not to be managed by your investors' expectations. So my the way I mean I can just share from my personal experience, I will do anything in my power to bootstrap and to start very, very lean and to really go through the initial process of validation and feasibility without any external money as much as I can. Because once you collect external money, and no matter how flexible and how good are the investors are going to be, in some ways you're going to service their expectations. And this is where it gets tricky to be very honest and authentic about the true reality of where you are and where you should go. And that's my two recommendations.
Okay, fantastic. So some uh, food for thought. Uh, coming from marshmallows to new growth opportunities. Perhaps Gigi could also chime in on what you see as maybe you could talk a little more to what are some of the opportunities you might see in your own area. You already mentioned with creative forms of marketing for existing businesses and then giving leading to more marketing, which might lead to more opportunities going forward. But maybe there are some ideas that you see um, right now.
Yeah. So I have like two suggestions, especially for budding entrepreneurs. And the first is, especially during this time, COVID time, we actually have the luxury of more time. And so they take that time to learn. Um, there is just a lot of people are doing stuff and doing webinars in order, since they have time. And they're I see, all these emails being sent to me, being marketed on LinkedIn, some really interesting seminars. And take that time and learn. Get, you know, don't just sit and wait for the world to move on. Go and learn. Go maybe learn some coding. I was reading about there's some seminar or some school program where one of my friends went and learn how to create a mobile app, and you'll learn the skills. Maybe you'll never write a mobile app again, but if you hire someone to write a mobile app, at least you know what they have to do. So take this opportunity to learn, to listen to seminars, and keep growing. My second recommendation in this time is keep looking for opportunities to create value. Okay, whether, like the example I gave of the husband and his wife basically making masks and giving it out to people. It really, they were giving value, but in return, they ended up getting a lot of attention and marketing value. And like, we're sitting here, and since I'm not on a plane 30% of my time now, I actually have a lot of hours. And there's, in the US right now, at least in our community, there's, with schools going online, especially for K through 12, a lot of parents are hiring tutors, hiring teachers to come into their home or teach their kids privately. But what about the more underprivileged kids whose parents don't have the money, who don't have the internet, who don't have the computers? And so some students of mine, so my Berkeley students, are actually talking about providing free tutoring services to some of the underprivileged high school students, especially in tough subjects like chemistry, physics, calculus, where usually if you go to school, you can, after class, you can go up to the teacher and get some extra help, but they can't do that anymore. And so we're thinking about creating some free online tutoring for underprivileged students. And for my students, it's a good chance for them to hone their skills in some of the hard topics. Oh, yeah, one of the topics my students want to do is actually mentor in computer science, some computer programming. And so just keep looking at ways to create value, because you'll create value for other people, you'll build relationships of people valuing you, and you'll also actually create inner happiness because you're doing something productive and not just being paralyzed.
Right, and I think with what you said with free webinars and training tools, educational kind of materials out there, there's so many that are out there and free for all of us to use. And I think one great tool or webinar is actually the Asian Leadership Conference. So for those who are watching today, you're benefiting really from Ron and Gigi coming. So please do like and subscribe. I don't know if I can say this on this webinar. But I've really, really enjoyed our discussion. I think it's not only helpful for young startups and students, but also for myself, being able to hear from those who've really been on the ground for so many decades and also in contact with so many startups as well. So thank you both for the time and the input that you've given us today. And this must be a miracle. We finished right on time. But perhaps before we go, if you could maybe share a final word or thought, or perhaps word of encouragement to our viewers today. Perhaps we can start with Ron.
Okay, I mean, first of all, thank you so much. It's a really enjoyable discussion, and it's it's something that we do every day. But when we have a chance to talk about it and share our experiences, it's also doing something good for us, not only for the audience. I do want to say that it is very, very unusual times, and this COVID-19 in some ways have a terrible outcome. However, there is also an opportunity, and I very much want to inspire and encourage the audience to take this COVID-19 situation as an opportunity to develop, learn, like Judy said. And one last comment is that recently, I think that this situation enabled us actually to collaborate between ourselves, but also between countries. So, for instance, we have an Israel R&D location here. But I was so fortunate to have good friends in Korea, and in some ways, actually friends that complement what we need. So we're doing what we're doing best, which is creativity and innovation and deep research. But then with our friends in Korea, we are slowly getting this into the product and industrial type of modality, and that's something that I'm very fortunate for, and I think it will have a long-term impact. So I'm very, very happy to have the opportunity today to speak to you both and also to continue my very good relationship with the Korean um, market, engineers, investors, and academics. So thank you very much.
So very glad to hear that cross-border ties are even stronger despite the social distancing. So thank you so much, Ron, for your input. And I'll give the last word to Gigi.
Yeah. So my last word, especially to all the young people out there, is ad- accept and realize that adversity is actually an opportunity. When there's adversity, there's an opportunity to innovate. And if you look at Korea, Korea was one of the first countries to be hit by COVID because you're so close to China. But Korea actually did a great job. You guys innovated, you came up with faster tests, processes to identify the spread, to be able to stop it really soon. And it, the adversity of being one of the first countries to be hit by COVID led you guys to be the first to innovate. And you've done some amazing innovations to address COVID and bring life closer back to normal. And so do that with all the other things in life. When you see adversity, don't be discouraged. Look at it and go, hey, it's an opportunity to innovate. Thank you
Fantastic.
very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Gigi, and we hope to show you the spirit of innovation continue in Korea despite these tough times, and maybe you know thanks to them as well. So thank you both for your time, and we look forward to hosting you again soon, hopefully in person. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Hannah. You were great.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. You are fantastic. I hope to see you again.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.